What are the origins and definition of gentrification? The word gentrification was coined in the early 1960s by British sociologist Ruth Glass. However, the process of rebuilding an area accompanied by the influx of affluent people into a deteriorating area that displaces poor residents has been traced back to a well-known poem, The Eyes of the Poor, composed in the 1860s. In this poem, written by Charles Baudelaire, the author writes of his feelings of despair and class guilt after witnessing an impoverished family looking in on a new cafe. Gentrification is defined by the following straightforward definition: an economic and social process whereby private capital from real estate firms and developers and individual homeowners and renters reinvest in fiscally neglected neighborhoods throughout housing rehabilitation, loft conversions, and the construction of new housing stock. Unlike urban renewal, gentrification is a gradual process occurring one building or block at a time, slowly reconfiguring the neighborhood landscape of consumption and residence by displacing poor and working class residents unable to afford to live in revitalized neighborhoods with rising rents, property taxes, and new businesses catering to an upscale clientele. Gentrification can vary by time, place, and stage of gentrification, but most scholars concur that gentrification's defining traits are an influx of capital and resultant displacement, and the transformation of local social character, culture, amenities, and physical infrastructure. In general, most scholars are in agreement with the aforementioned defining traits of gentrification, but the scholars seem to vary on their emphasis of the distinct elements. For instance, some stress the displacement of the poor and working class residents, while others devote greater attention to the transformation of the housing stock. Most definitions of gentrification center on gentrification's outcomes or consequences, rather than on its cause or on the character of the process. Many definitions of gentrification hinge on gentrification's outcomes, such as economic revitalization, transformation of the built environment, and socioeconomic displacement. The outcomes of gentrification seem to have greater collective agreement among scholars than the causal factors. For instance, Ruth Glass links gentrification to the restoration of historic homes. Ruth believes that shifting political and economic ideologies encourage middle class individuals to invest in central London properties that a previous generation had devalued. Other scholars cite demographic trends and social policies as the leading factor in causing gentrification. The disagreement about how to define gentrification results from a combination of the extent of gentrification and of our attention to it. How to identify if gentrification is occurring. Gentrification is grouped into two categories of factors: 1. Production or supply side factors, and 2. Consumption or demand side factors. Production or supply side factors are cycles of disinvestment and reinvestment in a community. An example of a supply side factor occurs when there is a shortage of middle class housing outside of the central city, thus pushing members of the middle class into urban areas. The supply side explanation suggests that economic and political conditions paved the way for gentrification. Consumption or demand side explanations hinge on the theory that a market cannot exist without complementary consumer demand and preferences. This theory suggests that housing stock, economies, and state policies influence gentrification, but that gentrification would not occur without gentrifiers who wish to participate in the process. Supply and demand are not the only factors of gentrification that are debated. There is a debate amongst production side theorists that involves the relative weight of the specific supply side factors. The debate stems from the relative influence of market conditions versus government policies and practices. Advantageous market conditions open the door for large corporations to play a central role in gentrification. This theory can be witnessed by the gentrification of New Orleans' French Quarter. The French Quarter in New Orleans can be described as a tourism gentrification. The high tourist population that flooded New Orleans perennially over the past 2 decades created lucrative market conditions. As a result, alliances between private developers and the local government were developed, and a renewal of the French Quarter commenced with funding from these new formed alliances. Gentrification occurs where the gap between existing and potential ground rents is the greatest. Gentrification usually occurs in neighborhoods that are within a close proximity to a neighborhood with wealth. Gentrification occurs in neighborhoods close to affluent areas because these areas are sought after, but the middle class cannot afford these affluent areas. As a result, the middle class starts to gentrify an area close to these desirable neighborhoods because the property values are substantially less. There are suggestions that the relationship between globalization and gentrification exists because there is an increasing competition between cities for available resources. It is argued that cities utilize gentrification in an effort to accumulate capital and identify themselves as distinct, attractive, or cutting edge. This idea can be supported by a recent visit of the Olympic Committee to the city of Chicago to evaluate the city's recent bid for the 2016 Games. The Olympic Committee was guided not only to athletic fields and support facilities, but also through the city's most upscale neighborhoods. Likewise, cities are very conscious of their global city rankings because city officials believe that these rankings attract tourists and gentrifiers who are members of an exclusive global community. Many experts on the subject of gentrification believe that gentrification thrives in cities at the top of the global economy, while many experts believe that gentrification occurs primarily in cities that flourish economically. Some experts comment that gentrification can be observed in cities across the globe because of an increasing concentration of the middle class along with international professional managerial classes. Who are the gentrifiers? Stereotypically, an image of a gentrifier usually consists of a person with affluence, education, and white privilege. This image presumes that gentrifiers share a set of cultural orientations and motivations for engaging in gentrification. These gentrifiers have an interest in historic preservation or home restoration, attention to property aesthetics, and desire to save or uplift their place of residence. This stereotypical view of the gentrifier as a white professional who is affluent and childless does not recognize other gentrification participants. Many gentrification participants are African American professionals, single mothers, and bohemian artists, for instance. Gentrifiers cannot be grouped into one segment of the population. Gentrifiers vary greatly in their attitudes toward gentrification and longtime residents of the inner city neighborhoods that they gentrify. The difference between gentrifiers cannot be easily recognized by demographic differences. Gentrifiers have various reasons for engaging in gentrification. A leading argument amongst gentrification debaters is gentrification's economic benefits. Gentrifiers can be attracted to an area by housing affordability and the prospect of earning a profit by purchasing real estate and revitalizing areas. Other debaters will agree that gentrifiers are attracted to central city amenities such as proximity to work opportunities and cultural amenities. Also, cultural tastes such as appreciation for historical homes or urban diversity attract gentrifiers to an urban area. Gentrifiers are also categorized by their relationships to their neighborhood or town. These relationships explain a gentrifier's desire for historical preservation and another's taste for demolishing an existing improvement to build new construction. To explain a gentrifier's urge for historical preservation, a correlation usually exists between the gentrifier and the local history of the community. A gentrifier's distinct orientation can be class-based, suggesting that the less affluent gentrifiers have more concern for longtime residents. For instance, African American professionals gentrified Harlem because of a confluence of their own and the neighborhood's racial identity. Some arguments suggest that a gentrifier's orientation derives from the period of gentrification to which he or she is associated with. Other traits like sexual orientation have been described as having a relationship to gentrification. A debate exists about the extent to which gentrification causes displacement to longtime residents of a neighborhood. Also, is there a correlation between displacement caused by gentrification and the population group it affects? The centralized argument about gentrification's outcomes and consequences is the debate between those who believe that gentrification is of public benefit and those who argue that such a benefit of tremendous cost for longtime residents. Those in the first camp, the minority camp, believe that gentrification reverses decades of urban decay by reintroducing crucial economics, cultural, social, and institutional resources to the community. This argument is further reinforced by the theory that gentrifiers are not the only ones that benefit because many others currently living in the community rely on institutions that gentrifiers help revitalize, such as schools. The second camp of debaters will argue that gentrification disrupts longtime residents' social and family networks. Gentrification severs their ties to healthcare centers, places of worship, and can lead to the loss of housing and business closure. Furthermore, only a few longtime residents are able to stay in the community long enough to enjoy the benefits discussed previously. Gentrification has the benefit of transforming a community through revitalizing economically depressed areas, increasing tax revenues, introducing or rehabilitating cultural and social amenities, and restoring historical properties. Transforming the community is believed to lead to job creation and decreased crime rates. In conclusion, the experience of living in a gentrifying neighborhood varies by place and time, by group, and from individual to individual. Even those who believe that gentrification produces benefits to neighborhoods and cities will argue the fact that there are consequences produced to a degree such as physical and social displacement along with racial discrimination. Many will debate the extent to which displacement occurs as well as about how to quantify displacement, but there are few that will expect gentrification to occur without these features.